So I had to lie down because I was feeling so unwell. And at that point, I was very concerned that I might not make it.
Barney, thanks ever so much for coming up to Stoke today. I've been really keen to have this conversation, to hear all about what you've been up to. I think this is the first time into the Map Room studio whilst it's been in its finished state. Is that true?
Yes.
What
definitely.
do you think?
I think it's fantastic. I think it's great. I think it's really good to be able to have this facility to be able to talk to people. I know one of the things we want to be able to do is to talk to a variety of people, do interviews, interview senior leaders, and promote a little bit more for both customers and colleagues, and giving people the opportunity to do that. So I think this is a brilliant opportunity to do that, really. So
Brilliant.
and it's great. It's a great setup. I think you guys have done a fantastic job setting it all up with all of the equipment. So
Awesome.
it looks great.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
We've been looking forward to having you in, and we want to hear all about this adventure that you've been on. So let's start with exactly that. Tell anyone who's listening and watching, what is it that you've done? And then we'll get into some of the more meaningful questions in a minute. Just walk us through it.
Yeah, so obviously recently returned from Everest Base Camp, and made the decision basically to go for a few reasons. But I suppose primarily, we are a business that's on a journey, and we're looking to achieve 10x growth strategy. We have a purpose which is specifically trying to create outcomes that change lives. And so I made the decision to do something that would help inspire the team, because we're trying to move at pace, and I wanted to be able to make a decision and do something that basically was out of my comfort zone and would therefore inspire the team to do things that are outside of their own comfort zone as well.
Brilliant. So Everest Base Camp, right? That often, I don't know much about it. I don't know much about the area. I've got a friend, I think, who's once did the Everest Base Camp.
Yeah.
Just what is it? What does that actually mean? What is the event and the adventure that you've been on? Sort of break down that journey from sort of start to finish for us.
Yeah. Well, so I suppose Everest Base Camp is probably the most well-known of all of the base camps in the Everest region, and primarily because it is the base camp of Everest, so the world's highest mountain. It's where all of the climbers set off from before climbing up Everest. So it's the most well-known. It's probably of all of the treks that you can do in Nepal, it's the most well-known. And, the sort of jumping off point for doing that is initially obviously Kathmandu. So most people fly into Kathmandu, and then they fly usually from Kathmandu to Lukla, which is the nearest airport to Everest Base Camp.
Yeah.
And then trek, which usually takes from between usually 2 weeks. It can take a little bit less and it can take a little bit more, but it's usually about 2 weeks to get then to Everest Base Camp and back. So yeah, it's a good trek. You gain a huge amount in terms of elevation. So Kathmandu is about 1,400 meters.
Yeah.
Lukla is about 3,400 meters. So you set off from Lukla already at a reasonable altitude, 3,400 meters, and then obviously Everest Base Camp is 5,360, I think it is.
Yeah.
So you're basically walking, a reasonable to a reasonable altitude.
Yeah. So let's just go back then to prior to the event, because if I remember rightly, from our perspective within the business, we sort of, the moment between Barney's thinking about doing something here to he's doing it seemed to go very quickly. And then before we knew it, within the space of a week, maybe a week and a half, you were already there. Like, how long was this in your mind? And was it such a short space of time between idea to execution?
Yes, basically, in short. But so I've always wanted to do the trip. I've always wanted to go to Everest Base Camp. I've always been interested in the region.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to do it. And obviously the opportunity came up to basically take a few weeks out. So I took basically that 6 weeks out on sabbatical. And I wanted to do something, as I said, firstly to inspire the team. Secondly, we're just going through a brand refresh.
Yep.
So it was also an opportunity to take our flags, our Bateman Collins International and our Mapram flags, to Everest Base Camp to promote the work that we've done and celebrate that as well. So it was twofold really, and again, I wanted to do something that I thought was going to be challenging. So I think in the space of about 2 weeks, so from the point of making the decision, it was less than 2 weeks until I was then on the flight to Kathmandu. So literally in that sort of 10 days, I'd made the decision, bought a pair of walking boots, walked about 30 miles because I'm a cyclist, so I'm reasonably fit, but I had to give myself a level of reassurance and comfort. That I was going to be able to do it, my muscles were going to be able to, to be able to handle it, and walk in the walking boots as well. So kind of testing the legs and the boots and making sure that I could do it. So within 10 days, I'd made the decision, planned it, and then organised it, and then headed off.
So I've done nothing to this scale. I've done a couple of adventures myself in the past, and I must admit, I've always taken a long run up.
Yeah.
I've tried to plan that time around training and appreciate, you're a very fit individual with all the cycling that you do. But it's sort of also allowed me a time to come to terms with what I'm about to do.
Yeah.
However, even with a longer run up, nothing ever really prepares you for this stuff.
Yeah.
But I imagine you went from sort of the real excitement of having clicked the sort of register button, the book button, and sorted out all the flights and everything, through adrenaline of those days whittling down and all the preparation that just keeps you busy over that sort of short period beforehand. But how did you feel when reality set in? Because I imagine that all of a sudden you find yourself in this region and you're going, oh wow, I've now got to commit and deliver on what I've signed up for. Talk us through it. How did you feel when you arrived?
I think actually there's a number of sort of stages, I think, on that journey, actually.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I mean, as I said, I'm relatively fit. So whilst being relatively fit, I thought perhaps unjustifiably, I thought I can do this.
Yeah.
I actually thought it's probably not going to be that difficult, was actually probably my initial thought. So I thought, and I thought I can probably do this. So I feel confident that I could do it. And as I got closer towards going, I was just sort of doing more reading, because I'd done a bit of reading, but not as much. And I realised that actually it could be more of a challenge than I'd initially set.
So that was your first mistake.
But more, not so much in terms of fitness, but I think certainly in terms of recognising and talking to quite a few people in that time, I recognised that the altitude, actually was not insignificant, and lots of people actually don't make it, or often when they do these types of treks, they suffer really badly from altitude sickness. So the more I read about that, the more I sort of wanted to be prepared, and the more I slightly became a little bit more aware of the challenge that could pose. But I still felt pretty confident, and then obviously very quickly I was on the flight there. Actually, initially when we were going to fly from Kathmandu to Lukla to the airport, part of that journey had to be by bus, because they're doing some development work in Kathmandu airport. It was only actually in the last 24 hours before landing in Kathmandu did they confirm that actually we wouldn't need to travel by bus, we wouldn't need to travel by road, we could actually fly all the way from Kathmandu directly to Lukla. So that initially was great news, but it was also like, I've just lost that extra 12 hours of preparing myself for the fact that I'm now starting this journey. So there was then a realization, and I remember thinking, I'm ready, but I'm a bit more apprehensive than I was. Yeah. But I think the journey from Kathmandu to Lukla is an incredible journey. Basically, the flight it only takes about 40 minutes, actually about 30 minutes, to fly from Kathmandu to Lukla. But that flight is you fly from Kathmandu over some of the sort of low lying Himalayas to get to Lukla, which is the Tenzing Hillary Airport. and that is one of the most dangerous airports in the world. You know, they've had more than 50 fatalities from aircraft landing, taking off, or on the approach to Louclair. So it was probably one of the moments when I was slightly apprehensive. I'm not scared of flying, but I was certainly mindful of that. And the landing strip as you come into land is only about 1,700 meters, which is about half the distance of a normal runway. Yeah. And it's also at 30 degrees. So you're basically landing on a slope, quite a significant slope. So you see the landing strip as you approach it. And as you land, you know, the plane has to slam on its brakes pretty quickly so that it doesn't end up in the mountain. So that was quite exhilarating.
And you sent, we asked Barney, we asked you to update us where possible when you have, you know, access to a signal and data and so on. And I think it was the first video we received was the footage of you filming from inside the cockpit of a plane that didn't look particularly huge and robust, coming into land on that strip. Yeah. And even from the video, it looked, pretty dodgy.
Well, the pilots have to land by sight, so they basically have no navigational aids other than sight. So, and it's probably a 20-seater propeller plane. Yeah. And so when it's landing, there's the two pilots basically. If they can't see the landing strip, then they'll have to turn around and fly back to Kathmandu. So we were really lucky. Yeah. In fact, the weather was amazing on the day we landed. Blue skies, and we were able to land. But that was definitely a highlight, and one of the first highlights of landing there. And it makes you realise, that there is some risk in the journey. It's not one that is completely benign.
Absolutely. But you made it. You survived the first challenge of, I guess, many that were to come. Tell us about some of the other challenges then that you faced throughout that trek, through that elevation, and through that altitude that inevitably gets the best of them, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to mention is that it is beautiful. You know, the landscape, when you arrive and you start the trek, you know, the first part of the journey is actually really interesting. It's, you know, as much about understanding the culture of the Himalayas, the Nepalese people, and actually early on in the journey, it's beautiful, but you're also surrounded by incredible people and incredible mountains, and the views are spectacular as you go up the mountains. And actually one of the things that really amazed me was the colours. I mean, you know, we were lucky the weather was amazing when we were there, which it wasn't always, but in December, often the weather is better, that you have less cloud cover. And so, but the colours that you get, the flowers are still out, and the colours of the landscape are amazing. And so, you know, the first sort of first few days, when you're slowly going up the valley, are pretty amazing. But I think anything over, once you get to about 4,000 meters, that changes quite dramatically, actually. Right. So, as you head up the valleys, basically you start you start getting above the tree line. There's less vegetation, and you start to realise that actually not much survives over 4,000 meters. Right. You know, there's less vegetation. There are small communities, and we stopped at many of the sort of villages on the way up, and we stayed in some of them. And those communities, you know, particularly the higher you get, are very small. In fact, people often don't live there all year round. They only live in those communities during the trekking season or during the summer months. So you realise actually, you know, the environment is also quite inhospitable the higher you go, and so that's interesting, and that's really due to the altitude. I mean, that you have obviously some animals, you know, like yaks that can live obviously at that height, but the trail itself is interesting. You're constantly passed by trains of donkeys and jodhpurs or yaks that are carrying everything, because there are no roads, so everything has to be carried by a person or an animal up to each of those communities. So that in itself is amazing, because you literally are passed continuously by animals, and that's, you know, the noise of the trail is as interesting actually as the sights.
Sure.
You know, you have all of the donkeys or yaks have cowbells around their necks.
Yeah.
So you're constantly hearing the noise of the Himalayas as much as seeing it, which helps to sort of create, you know, quite a unique atmosphere and environment. So that's really amazing. But yeah, once you get above 4,000 meters, it becomes more difficult.
Yeah. Talk us through some of that difficulty then, because again, we received the odd update from you along the way. You know, we were speaking to Zoe, and the guys were discussing what we knew at various stages. And at one stage, the words altitude sickness were sort of raised. But you talk us through your experience there.
Yeah, so I suppose there were two things that I think, if I talk about them, two phases. Interestingly, whilst the first phase, actually, when you're going up to about 4,000 meters, you have symptoms of mild altitude sickness. Certainly I suffer from symptoms of mild altitude sickness, or AMS, which is acute mountain sickness. And actually everyone suffered pretty much in our group from those symptoms, which is predominantly sleeplessness.
Right.
So one of the most things that is very common is not being able to sleep well at altitude. And actually on one day we were climbing a mountain called Nagasang, and I think on that particular morning, I think I'd had no sleep the night before. In fact, on the preceding 4 days, I'd only had 5 hours of sleep, 2 of which with no sleep at all. So in the UK, that would be a problem. But interestingly, in the mountains, you know, overnight, it's very cold. I think we had temperatures of -10. I think the coldest it was -23.
Oh, wow.
And the tea houses are basically like huts. They have no insulation. So it's the same temperature in the hut, really, as it is outside. So when you wake up in the morning, there's no hanging around.
No.
You're
gotta
up
get
and
straight
you're getting straight into it. And so as a result, you know, you recover quite quickly from limited sleep.
Sure.
But that particular day, we were climbing up to Nagasang, which is one of the highest peaks that you climb to on the trek. It's about 5,100 meters high, and it's about 3 hours up. And less coming down. And that was a tiring day because you're walking very slowly. It was hard in parts. It's very rocky. In fact, at the end, it's basically a scramble. And that's really hard, but it absolutely was worth it. When we got to the top, and the views were spectacular. And you get from that peak, you get some of the most amazing views of Everest, Le Boucher, and some of the other peaks in the region. So that was amazing.
Talk us. So when these symptoms kick in, when you start to feel AMS or whether it was altitude sickness, did you have any moments where you sort of felt, oh, what have I done here? What have I got myself into? Or were you able to sort of combat that sort of your mindset going elsewhere and remind yourself of, you know, why you wanted to do this in the first place?
Yeah.
Talk us through maybe the mental challenge that you faced.
Yeah, well, the mental challenge became more difficult when, in fact, and the altitude sickness that I suffered was worse and reached the worst point when we got to a village called Le Boucher, which is about a day's walk from Everest Base Camp. And it's the last place we stayed before then the next day walking on to Everest Base Camp.
Yeah.
And when we arrived at Le Boucher, I was suffering from severe AMS. I did a couple of tests. Throughout the whole trek, they take your blood oxygen level and your heart rate. And your normal blood oxygen level should be 95.
Yeah.
But when I arrived in Le Boucher, it had dropped to about 70.
Really?
So it was significantly low. And then my heart rate was up. My resting heart rate was up. Normally my resting heart rate is pretty good. It's about 50.
Yeah.
And it was about 70. So again, higher than usual. And they do a Lake Louise altitude test as well, where they test other symptoms like dizziness, nausea, sleeplessness actually, and so on. And at that point, that showed that I was suffering from severe altitude sickness. And so at that point, I didn't think that I was going to be able to continue.
And how did you feel? Like, describe those symptoms to me. What physically, and then tell me how you were sort of feeling emotionally as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was suffering from severe nausea, so I felt very sick. I felt dizzy. In fact, the room was spinning.
Wow.
So I had to lie down because I was feeling so unwell. And at that point, I was very concerned that I might not make it. However, I had a guide, a townman guide, who basically was incredible, advised me what I should eat and drink, what I should take. I took an altitude sickness tablet, Diamox, which helped a lot.
Yeah.
I had garlic soup, which was one of the,
Oh, that was one of the recommendations.
One of the recommendations which I had, which also helped with rehydration, as well as the garlic. I think also helped with sort of blood oxygen levels. And I went to bed and I went to sleep, which is also one of the few times actually I had a really good night's sleep. I woke up on a few occasions through the night, and I had my vitals tested throughout the night. So I had them tested 2 or 3 times, and they were still not great. But by the time I woke up in the morning, I'd stabilised.
Yeah.
And at that point, whilst I wasn't feeling great, I felt well enough to carry on.
Yeah.
And so we made the decision to carry on.
Yeah.
So at that point I was relieved, because up until that point, certainly overnight, I was thinking not just can I carry on, but actually in my current condition, how do I get down? Because I'm not sure I would have, if I'd have continued feeling that way.
Sure.
I would have.
Because I guess that's the point, isn't it? You're going even further up, and at some point, you've got an elapsed amount of time before you return to your usual levels of elevation, and therefore anything, I guess, can happen in the reverse. Yeah,
exactly.
So where, at that point in time where you together with the team made the assessment to say, right, I think I can do this still, how far from your sort of destination base camp were you at that stage?
So that was, so I was just under a day. So basically that day when we woke up that morning in Le Boucher, during the morning we walked to a place called Gorekshep, which is the last settlement before Everest Base Camp.
Yeah.
And from there we had lunch at Gorekshep, and then we carried on to Everest Base Camp basically in the afternoon, and we arrived in about mid-afternoon at Everest Base Camp. So it was about another 5 hours of walking from the Boucher, and that was pretty. It's not the most attractive part of the walk, and there's lots of. It was a very windy day that day. It's very dusty actually. So the environment is not nice. I mean, the views of the mountains are spectacular, but actually there's a lot of dust in the air. Actually, you're walking on the terminal moraine, or the lateral moraine of the glacier, and so that moves a lot. So it's very icy. It's also very rocky, and there's rock falls that basically you have to stop to avoid sort of falling debris every so often as well. So it's not the nicest part of the walk actually. Yeah. But, obviously you're nearly there. So, you want to make it to Everest Base Camp anyway. And so, we carried on. But that was pretty tough. I wasn't feeling at my best at that point. And arriving at Everest Base Camp was both an enormous relief and excitement and exhilaration for having made it.
I can imagine. It's the bit that you, with any adventure, with any challenge, particularly something like this, you sort of, in my experience, you look forward to that end point, for that I've reached the destination, I've achieved what I've set out to. But equally, like there's an emotional part within you that sort of says, oh, it's kind of done now as well, and it's sort of a balance of emotions, I imagine, as well. But but on that approach to base camp, then when you started to realise I've done this, tell us how you felt.
I think I was tired at that point, but I was really relieved to have made it. I was, really pleased to have made it. The views are are pretty good, but actually we've had better views on the way. So actually, I would say the high points of the trek is not actually making it to Everest Base Camp.
Okay.
It's the high points. I mean, getting there is great, but there are so many better viewpoints, I think, on the way.
There's one video where, so you took the Insta 360 camera with you, and there's one video where it almost looks as if you've summited a mountain because it's so high up and the view is so incredible.
Yeah.
Presumably that's one of the ones that you're talking about, is it?
Yeah, so when you get to the top of Nagasaki, you get incredible views of all of the mountains, Everest, Lhotse, and many of the others, Amadablam, and so you get an incredible view from there of all of the mountains. And actually, that was probably one of the most spectacular moments on the whole trek.
Yeah,
that was incredible.
It looked incredible.
And actually, the climb is harder. So it's also, you get a sense of achievement actually for getting there on the day.
Yeah,
was actually, that was one of the best days.
The suffering then produced that view for you to enjoy, kind of thing.
Yeah. With
Yeah.
Everest Base Camp, it's great to get to Everest Base Camp. I mean, it was amazing, fantastic to get there. But actually, the view from Everest Base Camp, you can't see Everest, actually. You can barely see Everest. You can just see Everest. It's sort of poking out. But it's not the best view you get of Everest, actually.
Yeah.
But what you do get is an incredible view of the glacier. So what you do see is an incredible view of the glacier, the Khumbu Glacier, which is sort of, you're right on the edge of the glacier.
Yeah.
And actually, that was interesting. I've never seen a glacier quite like it. It has big crevasses, peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
And actually, that was really interesting to see, the impact of climate change on the glacier and on the environment. So that was pretty good.
Did you spend much time at base camp then, or is this like quick stop and now it's about traversing down?
Yeah, well, so we spent about half an hour at Everest Base Camp celebrating the fact we'd made it. Yeah. Taking photos. Obviously, I had the Bateman Collins and the Mapfre flags, which we raised at Everest Base Camp. Yeah. So that was great. That was a great moment, actually. That was a great celebratory moment to actually raise the flags and say we've made it. And so that took about half an hour. And actually, there's a big rock that has Everest Base Camp written on it.
I've seen the photo.
And so we're standing there with the flags on that rock. And then you can go a little bit higher, actually. So just above that, you can walk up a little bit further, and that's where you can look down on the Khumbu Valley and the Khumbu Glacier, and you can see the mountains. And actually, that's probably the best view you get from Everest Base Camp. Yeah, which is pretty good.
Brilliant. I think the question I really want to ask is, obviously, you're really pleased that you've done it and that you've achieved it. What would you say to someone else who's considering either something like that or specifically that? You go. What would you say to them?
I think I'd say, be prepared. Be prepared for the altitude sickness. Yeah. I think I'd say take some medical advice before you go. And I didn't get a huge amount of time to do that, so I'd say to see whether it is likely that you might need to take Diamox. Yeah. Be prepared for that. Take the Diamox if you need it, and take it early. Yeah. And I purposely didn't take it early. I took it later, and that probably was a factor. Yeah. So I think that's important. But ultimately enjoy it. It's a fantastic experience. The mountains are incredible. I think it's also a very humbling experience, because you're surrounded by such large, mountains. Sure. The views are phenomenal. The Nepalese people are very generous. So the whole experience is quite a humbling experience. So, I think enjoy it, basically.
You'd definitely say get on with it, do it, enjoy it, but with some preparation.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you learn anything about yourself? Surprise yourself? That aspect of overcoming some of those challenges that you described, did you handle them in the way you expected? What did you learn about yourself?
Yeah, I do quite a lot of sport, and obviously I do other challenges, cycling in particular, and so I think I think the thing that probably I learned the most is actually I think when you're that far away from home, and normally when most of the exercise that I do, I'm not far from home.
Yeah.
So it's easy to turn back if the weather turns against you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the thing that you learn in the mountains like that, when you're trekking or climbing or anything like that, is sometimes you're a long way from home, and it can feel like you're a long way from home.
Yeah.
And if you're not feeling great, it feels like it's a long way back.
Sure.
And I think probably the thing that I'd learned is just managing that. It's not fear, but certainly managing that feeling of, is if I don't feel great, then I've got a long way to walk back, basically.
Yeah, not having that usual support network that you can turn to and rely on.
Yeah.
Yes, you'd got your sort of team around you and others that were going through it with you, but nothing's quite like your own family, is it, I guess?
I think that's true, but I think that is the other thing that is really important, is having a really good supportive team around you. And I was lucky in that I had a great guide who's incredibly knowledgeable about the mountains, about the environment. Every single question that I asked, he knew the answer to, or would be able to get the answer pretty quickly. And everything from cultural questions to geographical questions to flora and fauna. He knew a lot, and so that was great. But most critically, he also was able to advise, when I did suffer from AMS, how I should manage that and what I should do and what I should take and eat and drink. And I think that's really important. I think there are factors that like drinking enough, eating the right foods, which I think are always important on anything like that.
Absolutely.
It's the same in cycling. You learn how to manage your diet for the environment and for the journey that you're going on.
Sure.
So you eat lots of good protein. It's exactly the same, I think, in the mountains. You'd start off the day with a bowl of porridge or eggs or something that was high protein and gave you the energy. And it's the same at lunch. You'd have noodle soup or something that was going to maintain you through the day, and then in the evening have something as well, like the Sherpa stew or dalbat, that was going to maintain you. So I think having the right diet, knowing what to eat, getting the right advice, taking that advice is all really important.
What goes into a Sherpa stew?
Pretty much everything. everything local. So it's meat.
Whatever you can get the hands on at that moment.
Meat, if they have meat, so that could be anything from beef to yak to chicken, potatoes, to vegetables. So
bit of everything.
A bit of everything.
It's what a good stew looks like, really.
That's right,
day, isn't it?
That's right.
And obviously you've got people at home who are waiting for the updates and waiting for you to get back. What do they think about all of this?
Well, initially they thought it was crazy that I was doing it. That was,
considering the 1 week turnaround between
2 weeks before Christmas, I think. My wife and family were wondering, was I going to be back in time for Christmas? But I think that that was fine. I think after sort of setting off, and I think being able to update constantly, send photos, send videos, that was great to be able to send those back, and so I think they appreciated that. But it was a great journey. It was a fantastic trip, but and it's a great time to do it. I think the other thing I'd recommend is December is a really good time to go and do that journey. If you can handle the cold. Which I'm not sure I could, I'm going to be honest. No, the cold was definitely a challenge. I mean, you'd go to bed at night wearing lots of layers, and certainly a base layer, and in a sort of 4-season sleeping bag. I'd have a hat on, so that I didn't get too cold at night, and it would be at least -10, sometimes down to -23. Of course, then the water would freeze in the taps. In fact, sometimes in the morning, they'd put a bucket of water by the basin because there was no water coming out of the basin. So you'd use the water in the bucket. Only there were a couple of mornings when that bucket of water was
also frozen.
Was just ice. It was just a block of ice. So you'd hit the ice, but the ice was just one single block, so you wouldn't really be able to wash. And actually, the other thing, of course, is no one showers. So you don't wash from the point when you leave. You don't wash until you get back 2 weeks later.
Yeah, so freezing cold and stinky is essentially what you're going with there.
Basically. Yeah.
Look, it was so nice for us as a team, sort of cheering you on from afar, waiting for the updates, and then finally we got the update to say that you'd made it, and one of the photos in front of the kind of base camp sort of plaque or whatever that shows the altitude. It was great to see. We were so chuffed that you did it. So chuffed as well because you loosely alluded to the idea that you took a sabbatical. Like, for anyone watching, this is a guy who founded the company and he very rarely takes any time off. So we pretty much forced you to try and take some time off for yourself. And in true Barney style, rather than having a rest, you've done something as epic as all the other things that you do. So it was great for us to hear what you were up to and the fact that you'd made it. So well done, mate.
Well, thank you. But it was also amazing to have the support from everyone, family, from everyone in the team. That was also, massively, kept me going because, having the support and the messages back from everyone, appreciating, those messages, but also, knowing actually that what I was doing it for wasn't just me. I was doing it for everyone else and wanting to kind of, raise the flags, make sure that everyone else saw, and experienced some of that journey was really important as well.
It was fantastic. Well done again. Thank you, Barney.
Thank you. Brilliant.